Recording. Here we
Excellent.
are. Hey, Jorgen, how are you?
Very good. How you doing, Simon?
Good. Finally able to get together and have a chat about what's something that's really important to me, and I know it's important to you. So yeah, thank you for joining me. So today we're doing a little bit of a chat about continuous improvement and overall team health, and how this is a really important topic to me because I've been working in Agile teams for decades, and it seems to be the thing that's always left to last, the thing that's always thought about at the end and not, at the start, because we're so busy and focused on the work and what we're producing that we almost think about the team and how we're working together as an afterthought. So when I came across everything that you're doing, I was like, wow, this is really important, and seems to be the thing that's always been missing. So that's why, even reading your book, like Unlocking Agility, it filled in a lot of the gaps for me in what I was seeing in the real world. So how did you come to continuous improvement?
Well, I think you're right. It is one of those things that sort of is usually viewed as an afterthought. But at the end of the day, I think that's really what agility is all about. If people were to sort of ask me in a very simple way, what is agile? It's really about being better today than you were yesterday. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It doesn't matter what kind of tools you have or processes you use, but at the end of the day, that's what this is about. It's about learning faster and than the competition, and keep improving. So yeah, I think this has always been really important. I think it's been one of those underlying things that we sometimes don't talk about explicitly, and sometimes I think it becomes a little bit esoteric and abstract. So I think what I've been trying to do in my book, and also with Comparative Agility, the tool is to bring this to the forefront, bring this, make it really concrete, in fact, and actionable. Because I think at the end of the day, once people understand what they can do better, and where those areas are, I think we can actually take action and do something about it. That's when that sort of, I guess we can call it a culture, starts forming, because ultimately that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and the key word that you use there is change, and that's, I agree, that's the heart of Agile. I mean, some people say to me, it's the term they use is navigating change at pace, but the point is the change part, where humans aren't so good at change. We sometimes stick to things from the past, we fear for the future. So having an actual culture where change is accepted and it's a part of who we are is actually really, really important, and is hard to come by. So.
Yes, it is. I mean, in fact, humans are terrible at change. I think there's been some research coming out that's just really scary. I think this was from a medical study where they found that heart patients that come to their doctor, and the doctor would literally say that you're now in dire straits. So unless you make these changes to your diet, you're literally going to put your life at risk. 9 out of 10 people will not make the changes in their diet. I mean, even when they know that their life is at risk. So that just tells you how difficult it is to change. And imagine this at scale.
And at worst, like, you can make the change, but then you just go back to the way you were, even though, making the change stick, that's really, really important as well. And that requires a regular rhythm and reinforcement of what you're doing is right. So
you're completely right. And that's where that environment plays in. That's why this is so hard to do alone. That's why it's so hard to do for a team. It's really the whole program, the whole organization that needs to be with this. Like from the top, the leadership needs to be part of this too. So that's why agile transformations are so hard.
And as you said, like, making it a real part of the company, the way you like to put it is make it part of the company's DNA. It is who we are. It's in every cell of who we are, to make that we embrace change and we move forward with that. So there's some good reasons behind it. Oh, there's our beautiful faces. So
yes.
I think we've introduced ourselves, but let's do it again. So Jorgen, you're the co-founder of Comparative Agility and the author of Unlocking Agility, one of the best books on agile transformation I've ever met, and I recommend it to everyone who I talk to. So that goes without saying. And my name's Simon Hilton. I'm an Agile coach and head of project management here at a company called Willow, but worked at a lot of the Agile transformations in the biggest telcos and grocery stores here in Australia. Okay, so the point here is what we're trying to talk about is that change. And in my eyes, effective and productive teams are the company's greatest asset. But those organizations, those teams and the needs from them are changing all around them. There's a greater demand on employees employees themselves demand more autonomy and mastery of their career, but also the changing markets around them need to be able to adapt to those changes quite quickly. And I think what is most telling is this statistic from Harvard Business Review that says that 52%, research shows that since 2000, 52% of companies in the Fortune 500 have either gone bankrupt, been acquired, or ceased to exist as a result of digital disruption. That's a pretty staggering number when you think about it, considering those companies have probably been around for decades upon decades before, but nearly half of them have disappeared in the last 10 to 15 years, because this was released in 2017. So, and really what they're putting it down to is change and being able
Yes.
to adapt to change.
Exactly, and I think what part of what this underscores is that this whole of agility, the whole idea of continuously adapting to change, like you said, it's not a it's not a cool thing. It's not a sort of okay, this is the flavor of the month kind of thing. It's actually a matter of survival. It's no longer something you do just because your competition does it. You do it because if you like to actually continue to exist as an organization, you need to take this seriously.
Yes. So what we have is, and on the next slide, is your 5 pillars of agile transformation that come from your book, Unlocking Agility. First being technology, which is where I think a lot of people think agile just sits at all and it doesn't belong anywhere else. But when you start to actually look deeper into it, to be successful, to not just be an agile team, but to be a successful agile organization, these 5 pillars all become really important. And what people will notice is that only one of them is technology. The rest of it is all organizational design, people, leadership, culture, very traditional and almost foundational parts of any business. The 2 that we're going to focus on here are people and culture, because they are really at the team level of how you can improve the team over time.
Yeah, this has been one of those. When I first came up with these 5, was back in 2008, 2009, and I've been trying to battle test these many times, and I haven't really found a better way to articulate, agile transformation in terms of the main pillars. There's 2 underlying parts of this, I can say. One of those is customer, and the other is purpose. But those are sort of, in a sense, external to this, if you know what I mean. I think these are the 5 that sort of affects the organization specifically, and then I think the purpose and the customer is sort of what underlines the why behind all of it. And I
Yeah.
think the idea around customer and purpose is interesting because sometimes that can be kind of a what starts first. Does the customer come first or does purpose come first? And that's really interesting because it's not an easy answer to that. I think it depends on the organization a lot. And it's if you ask some people, they always say, oh, we start with our customer. The customer is always right, and that essentially becomes our purpose, to please the customer. And then the other people who will say, well, no, we actually we start with the purpose, and then if a certain customer doesn't believe in that particular purpose, that is okay with us. We don't want any part of that. A lot of these sort of altruistic, and I think especially when Silicon Valley had a little bit of a, I guess, more of an altruistic view. I think right now we view them more as a pure capitalistic mechanism. But back in the day,
Yes.
when you hear things like "do no evil," right? Google used to say these things. It was purpose, and then all the things that kind of came from that would be, okay, that's our purpose, and then what are the products and technologies and the customers we can serve, knowing that part of our purpose here is to do no evil. I think later on we've seen that may have changed slightly. I'm not saying they do evil on purpose, but you can also see that they will compromise on that when they do business in China, for instance. They'll say, well,
Yes.
privacy is really important except for when it affects our
Yeah.
bottom line.
First one is people, and it's, I think, almost we've talked about it the whole way, is that leaning into change, and this is just being okay. The growth and change is a part of life. Growth and change is a part of who we are. It's a part of our DNA. So it's what a lot of people term a growth mindset, but it's really hard to just, I'm really interested in your point of view here, because it's really hard just to say someone, have a growth mindset. Um, here's your growth mindset card. Now you have a growth mindset. It's something which is quite innate, and that's why it's interesting when you say it's part of the company's DNA. It's got to be part of a person's DNA as well.
Yeah, it does, and I think this is where I think leaders play a really important role, because they in many ways can sort of affect how people are being evaluated, how people are being rewarded, how people are being incented to do certain things. And I think when it comes to growth mindset, Carol Dweck was the professor who came up with that Part of what she found by doing research in kindergartners and later on in people in middle school was that, if you praise people for being smart, it's like, oh, you're such a smart person. um, that could be have a temporarily positive effect, but ultimately that person became very frustrated and ultimately did not become a very high performer, because the person then essentially had a fixed mindset in the sense that, okay, I'm smart, that's why I'm good. And then if I can't figure something out, well, then maybe I'm not smart enough. And you can't really change intelligence. Like, you're either smart or you're not so smart. I mean, it's not so much you can do about that particular part. You just kind of feel like you're failing because you're not smart enough. But if you praise someone because they work hard and you said, hey, you did really well, you worked really hard on that, it changed quite a bit of things, because what happened then is that the person would say, oh, the reason I succeeded is because I worked hard, and I kept getting better and better. And then when things started getting tough later on in life, these people who had sort of grown up with that type of mindset, they would say, well, okay, I didn't make this work, I am having some challenges. Well, you know what? That just means I need to work harder. And it means I need to try some more. And even though I failed here, I can try again. And I learned from that failure. And I could keep trying. And it was more of an experimental, more of a learning mindset that Carol Dweck discovered by being able to sort of praise the idea of learning as opposed to, you're smart, that's why you're succeeding. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at things. And I think Nadia Satella has been the person who's probably maybe the one who's kind of popularized this in business. He used this very consciously at the transformation with Microsoft, being very
Hmm.
clear that, we're going to embrace this idea that if you fail along the way, it doesn't mean that you don't have the ability. It just means that we need to work harder in terms of learning faster, so that we can continuously evolve the way we think of these problems, and not just say that, oh, well, you couldn't make it work because you weren't smart enough,
Hmm.
because you weren't good enough. It became, I guess this goes very nicely with psychological safety, because it then becomes safe to fail. Because if you
Mm.
fail, it's not because you're stupid. You failed because you didn't try the right thing, or because you need to just try again. It
Yes.
becomes less dangerous to not get the right answer right away. And I think that's very often what it comes down to.
Another part of people another part of people inside your pill is just embracing that diversity within teams. And we're not necessarily talking about demographic diversity, but diversity of opinion, diversity of skills, in order to get a uh, a better understanding of problems and how to solve them coming in. And I think it comes down to a slightly bit more of a lateral thinking technique, where there's many different ways you could solve this problem, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not really apparent on the first viewing of it. So it's important to think about the problem in much of a broad way to come to the best solution.
Yes, I completely agree. And this is the beautiful thing about agility, is that we understand that what we're trying to do here is to learn. And to learn, you need to have a broad marketplace of ideas. You need to have a
Mm-hmm.
broad perspective. And you just don't get that if everyone talks the same, thinks the same, looks the same.
Yep.
You need to come from different schools. You need to come from different countries. You need to perhaps speak different languages. I think it's beautiful that you may look different, you may think different, you may approach problems differently. All of these things are actually very beneficial. Now, we should be clear, because I think sometimes people think, we go overboard sometimes, and we say, oh, the diversity is the answer to everything.
Yep.
Diversity is not necessarily the most effective way to solve problems when there are simple problems to solve. And I
Yes.
think that's where the research has been pretty clear. If you're trying to build a bridge or something, you're probably not going to do great by having a bunch of basket weavers and people who have nothing to do with
Yep.
building bridges. uh, you'll
Yes.
bring in those architectural engineers and you'll probably do better. But in complex situations like we're dealing with here, when we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about not knowing, right, this is the whole idea of embracing the thing you
Yes.
don't know.
Yeah.
Then you need that diversity of thought, and that means that you might not be that doesn't mean that you'll build the solution the quickest, but you will build the best solution, and you will build the
Mm.
most innovative solution. And that's where that diversity is so beautiful. So
Yeah. And the next pillar we want to talk about is culture. Now, this is a very nuanced word across the world, across companies, all those kinds of things. But the culture model you talk about in your book is this one by Schneider, Just give us a walkthrough of this, please.
Yeah, so Schneider, he William Schneider, he wrote a book called The Re-Engineering Alternative, and essentially what he was doing, he was looking at different companies. He was looking at the way that they structure themselves, what type of leadership they have, and he sort of came up in a very simple way. He came up with an idea of looking at, the way the people were rewarded, the way the leadership was communicating value, the way they were recognizing value over time, and also looking at how companies can kind of grow that. And so he was trying to classify it, not saying that one is exactly one or the other. There's always some dominance here, but he was able to sort of uh, classify it into a couple of different key components, I guess you can call it. And I thought it was really interesting how he did it. So the four components he had was, the first one I think he called the cultivation, or he called it a cultivation culture, where the idea here was about enablement. It was about working together as a team. It was really kind of an interesting, the way he looked at it was kind of like a coach, a person who's in a cultivation cult, is charismatic, is inspiring.
Hmm.
So I thought that was really interesting, and very often he would talk about that as a way to inspire people to go above and beyond, things like that. And we've heard about companies that are in the cultivation realm, if you will. I think Apple under Steve Jobs is probably a good example of someone who would be there.
Yeah.
Then there would be competence culture, which would be a typical sort of, well, the smartest person in the room is the one who makes a decision. We only hire the best and the brightest, and at the end of the day, it's the data, and the smartest person who rules. I think
Hmm.
Google typically comes in that category. The way they hire people is very often through algorithms and word problems and things like that.
Yeah.
University environments could be another situation where a competence culture might be ruling. And sometimes you hear situations where maybe a superior officer will have a certain opinion, and then someone who's inferior to him or her, from a rank perspective, could actually say, hey, here's what I've seen and here's my data to back it up, and that person would actually win the argument because of that. That's a
Yes.
typical example of a competence culture. And then
Hmm.
control culture is what we probably look at as more traditional top-down management. That's kind of
Hmm.
where, military is a typical example of a control culture, or I think that's starting to change as well, where the
Hmm.
idea is that the person with the highest rank, the person with the most experience, is the person you will follow. You don't really question that. Like, you don't want necessarily a corporal to declare war on Russia. Not a good idea. You probably want
Yeah.
that to be going
Hmm.
up the ranks. So before you do anything drastic, so that would be an example of that. The control culture being very top down and sort of structured, and very clear in its sort of ranks. And then the collaboration culture, which is something that I think we've gotten a lot more traction lately, which is really the leader as the coach. It's really about integration of ideas. It's the idea of creating customer value through having really deep collaboration between people from different areas. I think they talk about sometimes sports teams can fall into that category, and I think sports teams are actually not a bad analogy to agile organizations, because talk about a diverse set of skills. Each of these people on whatever team you're thinking of, whether it's American football or soccer or volleyball for that matter, they all have their unique skills, knowledge, and abilities, and you need to somehow make sure you can make this work as a whole. And that's what I think they're talking about in the collaboration culture.
Kind of puts us nicely on the next slide of there's many things that in the space, well, in the agile space and traditional space, which are kind of touch upon this, but they all kind of don't quite get there. We just talked about HR systems. While I still believe there's much great value in individual appreciation, individual um, kind of feedback, it doesn't aggregate to a team level and doesn't help the team take on ownership of their future and of their diversity.
I think you're right, and that's what's starting to happen now. Is I think HR is recognizing that. So you could see a lot
Mm-hmm.
of change. You probably heard about Agile HR is becoming a thing
Yes.
now. They're
Mm-hmm.
also recognizing that they need to up their game, which I think is wonderful. I think we're going to get a lot of great support and alignment from HR in the future. I was talking to one person. This is probably about 3 months ago. She was a head of HR for one company, and she got a new job and what she was called was CTR. No, CTO was what she would call it. And I was thinking, CTO, is that Chief Technology Officer? And she said, no, I'm being called the Chief Transformation Officer. And I was like, whoa, that's great. And I was like, well, is that because you're not working in HR anymore? And she's like, no, that is that is the
That
role
is
of HR.
HR.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
is HR.
exactly.
Exactly. I am the Chief Transformation Officer because I am in HR. And I was like, that is awesome. And I think at the end of the day, this people is core to all of this, just like you said. And in HR, if they can't be part of that, like where should they be? So I
Yes.
think that's wonderful to see things like that.
Yeah. Then you've got traditional survey tools like your Survey Monkeys and all those kinds of things, which are really just blank slates. And I think the most important thing here is not the tool, but the method inside it, the the ideas and the way that you actually ask questions and things like that. So while this is still an option, it doesn't really take world's best practice and apply it in an easy to consume format.
It's true, and the thing about surveys that I'm now a lot more humble about is that creating a question isn't as easy as you might think,
No, it's
because you
not at
might not
all.
be measuring what you think you're measuring, and
Yep.
that can be really scary, and it can also waste a lot of people's time if crafting a good question and then later on being able to validate that that question actually measures what it's supposed to is actually something that data scientists do, and it's a
Hmm.
profession and it's a craft, and it's something that I think we may have taken a little bit lightly. I think SurveyMonkey is an excellent platform for creating surveys, but I also think it can be harmful if you use that um, without some intention. So yeah, it's good
Hmm.
to get some feedback, but I think we got to be careful with how you craft those questions and
Hmm.
what you do with them.
You hit it on the nail here. It's the actual question, which is important. Then we also have our retros, which while we love retros, are localized and sometimes forgotten. I mean, the team, I would always say that we're not saying that retros aren't necessary because I believe they are, but how do you actually aggregate that data and also compare and see growth over time?
Completely agree. I mean, retrospectives are super important. I think if you think of some of the data that we've been able to do through comparative agility, actually found that retrospectives are absolutely positively correlated to uh, higher customer satisfaction, to more team productivity, and to team velocity. So
Hmm.
it's a really positive thing. Now that means that those retrospectives are done regularly, and also that action is being taken on those retrospectives. I
Yes.
think very often this becomes one of those ceremonies that people just kind of do, but they don't always take action on the outcomes of those retrospectives. And that can be, I think, a huge problem, because then it becomes more of a bitching session. It can be
Yeah.
frustrating, and it can actually be counterproductive. But retrospectives by themselves are really important. Problem is we probably don't take them seriously enough very often.
I agree. It sometimes seem like an afterthought in a lot of the cases, rather
Right.
than a core part of what we do. Um, let's not forget. I mean, aside from retro items, you've got your actual day job to do as well.
That's right.
There's all those things that need to be done, all those stories that need to be written, or whatever it is that you do. But that's why I feel like without an actual, while I don't want to focus on tools too much, I think without the team being effectively resourced with tools or methods to take the burden of managing retros away, they'll be much more successful if they have something that helps them through that journey as well, but also provides much more comparative understanding of data over time. Because I mean, the way I see comparative agility sitting is actually on top of retros. You'll still do your retros every week or whatever your cadence is, but doing that actual collection of data every 3 months actually enhances the overall process.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. It's a complement to retrospectives, and it also gives you a bigger picture. So you can look at things at the team level, you can look at things at the program level, or even the organizational level. At the end
Yes.
of the day, it just gives you insights that you probably didn't have before, and
Mm-hmm.
that data, those kind of insights, is fuel to continuous improvement. It's really hard
Mm-hmm.
to do any type of improvement if you don't know what you're improving. And
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the challenge we have today. There's so many things you can focus on, and we know what happens if you focus on too many things. You just don't gonna get anything done. So I think
Hmm.
the one thing that we can try to do through meaningful data is to try to focus our efforts, kind of separate the signal from the noise, and just really do that really well. I think that's the beginning of great
I think that's a
implementation.
really good point also. Something that I often fear in retros is the psychological safety to actually say what I really mean.
Right.
And I do think that's understated, that the psychological safety there isn't always present. And then how would you know if it's not without some sort of other channel where people can be anonymously, if they want to, tell us, say what they really think? And I think that's where comparative agility can actually enhance that entire process by seeing if what we're seeing, what's coming out of people's mouths in person actually matches the anonymous data, which we're getting through another tool.
That's right, which is very agile. I mean, the thing that I love about agile is it doesn't necessarily solve your problems, but it makes them very visible. So
Yes.
once these problems have come out in the open, then it's up to us as professionals to deal with those problems. But agile in itself doesn't solve your problems. They're still going to be
No.
there. They're just going to
No.
make them very visible. And it's similar
Hope.
with comparative agility.
Yeah. Hopefully, it just gets you on the path of the right problems, not
That's right.
just.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Aside from retro items, you've got your actual day job to do as well.
That's right.
There's all those things that need to be done, all those stories that need to be written, or whatever it is that you do. But that's why I feel like without an actual, while I don't want to focus on tools too much, I think without the team being effectively resourced with tools or methods to take the burden of managing retros away, they'll be much more successful if they have something that helps them through that journey as well, but also provides much more comparative understanding of data over time. Because I mean, the way I see comparative agility sitting is actually on top of retros. You'll still do your retros every week or whatever your cadence is, but doing that actual collection of data every 3 months actually enhances the overall process.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. It's a complement to retrospectives, and it also gives you a bigger picture. So you can look at things at the team level, you can look at things at the program level, or even the organizational level. At the
Yes.
end of the day, it just gives you insights that you probably didn't have before,
Hmm.
and that data, those kind of insights, is fuel to continuous improvement. It's really hard
Mm.
to do any type of improvement if you don't know what you're improving. And
Hmm.
that's part of the challenge we have today. There's so many things you can focus on, and we know what happens if you focus on too many things. You just not going to get anything done. So I think
Hmm.
the one thing that we can try to do through meaningful data is to try to focus our efforts, kind of separate the signal from the noise, and just really do that really well. I think that's the beginning of great
I think that's a
implementation.
really good point also. Something that I often fear in retros is the psychological safety to actually say what I really mean.
Right.
And I do think that's understated, that the psychological safety there isn't always present. And then how would you know if it's not without some sort of other channel where people can be anonymously, if they want to, tell us, say what they really think? And I think that's where comparative agility can actually enhance that entire process by seeing if what we're seeing, what's coming out of people's mouths in person actually matches the anonymous data, which we're getting through another tool.
That's right, which is very agile. I mean, the thing that I love about agile is it doesn't necessarily solve your problems, but it makes them very visible. So
Yes.
once these problems have come out in the open, then it's up to us as professionals to deal with those problems. But agile in itself doesn't solve your problems. They're still going to be
No.
there. They're just going to
No.
make them very visible. And it's similar
Hope.
with comparative agility.
Yeah. Hopefully, it just gets you on the path of the right problems, not
That's right.
just.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So the way that we do this is by collecting the data, which was we're saying this is a very small part of, well, not a small part, but the beginning of the entire process. After that, you'll find the narrative of stitch this together. We have seen this data over here, this data over here, and go around this whole cycle in order to actually take action. We'll just dive into this now. So the first step is to collect the data, which is where the tool comes into it.
That's right. So what we see here is a very simple report. I just thought it would be nice to at least have an example so we can kind of go through it end to end.
Yeah.
There's lots of other things you can do, but essentially what's happening here is that there's a team here, and this is actually real data. I've changed the name of the team though because they didn't want me to, to expose
Yes.
who they were, what company they were working for, but it's real data. This is a team, Team Dolphins from May 2018, who's comparing themselves from May to December 2017. So it's one team at two different points in time. And what you see here is every time that the team from May is indicating they're doing better, it's going to be positive. It's going to be above the zero. And it's going to be blue bars. So they're doing fairly well here. And every time they indicate they're doing worse, it's going to be negative, or in this case, sort of orange bars below the bar. And right off the bat, you can get an idea what's going on. You can see that in most cases they're probably doing better than before, which is really positive.
Yeah.
That's
Hmm.
a great thing. And you can look at a little spider graph to kind of get some perspective, and you can see if you unclink the world index, kind of look at the data set here for May 2018, you can see that in most of these dimensions they're doing quite well. In technical practices probably struggling a bit. Some issues probably with quality. You can overlay the world index, and you can see that they're doing better than the world index in most of these, but that's not so great here when it comes to technical practices and quality. If you overlay this, you could see that even though the world index is probably something they do better than, uh, world index is kind of a messy place. That's the truth of what's going on out there, which is sometimes ugly. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the world index is what you should strive for, but you can
Hmm.
see that in most cases they're actually doing better than what they did in 2017. So
Yeah.
positive overall. But that being said, there's certainly things that you can dig into here. And one of those, if you look at teamwork, there's quite a few things. You can zoom in a bit. Looks like in teamwork management, for instance, you see a couple of things stand out. Here's one statement here. Management sets goals, but doesn't tell team members how to achieve them. This is something where the team is indicating that compared to what they did in December 2017, this is no longer taking place. This is actually happening now at a less frequent rate than before. They're saying now
Hmm.
that management are now actually not just setting goals, they're actually telling people how to do their work, which we know is
Yeah.
sort of an anti-pattern.
Yeah.
So, let's say if you did this analysis, you can dig into this data and find all sorts of other things as well. You see there's some other things here, but for the sake of this exercise, how about we just went down and let's say we focus on this one first, and we said, all right, here we have an hypothesis. We can see that this is happening. It's standing out. If we look at, for instance, the average score, it's a low score, 2.71. That's a really low score on a 5-point scale. If we look at the distribution characteristics, I mean, look at this. This is a very wide bar, which tells
Yeah.
us that the team members really aren't agreeing with each other on this particular question. So, as a coach, this is probably something we should talk about a little bit deeper.
I love this slide. Uh, the question is, are you ready for this? Are you ready for this change? Are you ready for this honesty?
This is true. This is scary. I mean, this is one of those things where I do talk to organizations sometimes that are very, very top down and really don't want to necessarily hear the bad news. And this
Hmm.
is where I have to tell them that, comparative agility is going to definitely help you shine a light on things. But if you don't have an environment where people can feel comfortable talking about these things, if you can't speak up, if you don't feel like you can say, you know what, this is not working, then whatever efforts you do are going to be very short term in nature. They're not
Hmm.
going to be sustainable. You're not going to create that culture unless you create that environment where you are actually open to change and open to hearing sometimes uncomfortable news. And that's the caution of this, which kind of leads to this next slide, which is really all about
Mm.
psychological safety, because that underpins a lot of this.
The thing I talk about with people, though, when it comes to this is the old uh, phrase, no pain, no gain.
That's
Without
right.
change, change is painful and change is uncomfortable, but that's the point of it, and that's why we do it.
That's right.
So, as we said at the beginning, we've got to be comfortable with that, with being uncomfortable, but it takes more than just saying it. You got to feel it as well.
You're right, and it can be very uncomfortable for for managers often, because I think managers feel that they do have a certain an added responsibility here, and
Yeah.
that's probably true. And then when they hear from their team members or from their the people that they work with that they're not happy with the way things are, that they are pointing out all these areas of improvement, that can be uncomfortable, especially if you didn't know about this. Maybe this wasn't very clear. Maybe this wasn't articulated before, and then you can feel that, oh, things are great. I'm doing awesome. Now suddenly you're hearing that it wasn't as great as you always thought it was, and that can be a little bit uncomfortable. I totally understand that. But like you said, at the end of the day, that is part of what we do here, to be comfortable with continuously changing the way we work.
Mm-hmm. And that is, I mean, the term is psychological safety. And here you've got a quote from Amy Edmondson. Psychological safety is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes.
Yes, this sounds maybe obvious to some degree, but honestly, it is so powerful. And
Yeah.
it's not just the humiliation, like, oh, that's a silly idea, things like that, but it's also the punishment that people will
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, that's that guy once again saying this and that, and let's just ignore what he or she has to say. Let's make sure that that person doesn't come up for promotion next time. Let's label that person as not a team player. I mean, you've probably heard all these phrases before, but that's things that organizations will do sometimes. If you're one of those people that speak up, you might be shut down in many different ways. They can ridicule you, they can punish you, but what it does is very nefarious and very harmful, because it makes it so that others who see this will then not speak up and rather just keep quiet. There's a recent case that we've heard a lot about now, is the Boeing case. The Boeing Max.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, this is a classic example of a lack of psychological safety, because there were many people, and they found this now through the investigation, many people in the lower chains here that saw the issues happening with that particular software and the way it wasn't handling that situation really well, but they didn't feel that they could speak up. They didn't feel like they
Yeah.
could say something, because they didn't feel safe. They didn't feel like that was appropriate in that environment. So they rather just kept quiet and let this happen. And of course, that ultimately ended up costing, several hundred people's lives. So
Yeah.
this is not a small thing, and especially in knowledge work, especially in complex environments like we work in, this is
Yes.
this is absolutely crucial. Intentions and being open when
Mm-hmm.
you're making mistakes. I think part of the reason she came up with this research, this was actually done back in the late 90s. What Dr. Amy Edmondson was studying was hospitals. She
Mm-hmm.
done most of her work in the healthcare industry, and what she found is she was looking at, the way you look at success in terms of whether or not you're successful as a hospital, especially if you think of surgery. It's really, death rate is one thing that come up, but also
Yep.
the rate of return, essentially. So once a patient comes out of surgery, uh, what is the rate of which that person comes back again shortly
Yep.
thereafter? Because if the
Mm-hmm.
surgery is successful, you don't have to come back. And what she found, and that really surprised her, is that she was looking at these hospitals and she saw that in with, with those hospitals that actually had the best outcomes made the most mistakes. And
Oh.
she thought that was really strange. She's like, what's going on? She had to go through this, and she crunched the numbers several times. And she realized that when it comes to mistakes, such as, maybe there were certain things dropped, or there was a wrong dosage done at a certain point in time, or there was lots of little mistakes that were more frequent among those hospitals and those teams that had the best outcomes. And she was saying, well, how is this possible? And what she found after digging into it was that, of course, everyone makes mistakes, but it was the
Mm-hmm.
hospitals with a larger degree of psychological safety who felt comfortable reporting it. So those other
Ah.
hospitals who had the worst rates in terms of death rates and really serious negative outcomes, they also made mistakes. They just didn't report it because
Mm.
they just kept quiet. So
Mm-hmm.
these other hospitals who actually did really well, they made mistakes. Nobody's flawless. Psychological safety doesn't mean that you don't make mistakes, but it makes it so that you can actually speak up, you can report on it, you can take action on it, and you can improve based on it.
Yes.
And that's what those hospitals were doing, and that's why they were making more mistakes, on paper, than those who simply weren't reporting it at all and just keeping quiet.
Mm-hmm.
So I
If you
think
don't know
that's
there's a
really important.
problem, yeah, if you don't know if there's a problem, you can never find a solution.
Exactly, it's exactly right, and it takes me back to, an example I use in the book, which is, when I was looking at the Toyota plant in Indiana, and I remember going through that plant. They were doing lift trucks, and it was for me, a really great environment, because I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to lean and agile and things like that. Kind of walking
Yeah.
through the Toyota plant felt like,
Yeah.
nirvana for me. And then I was talking to the chief engineer, and I was asking about defects and how he sort of treated those. And he was saying, we're kind of, smiling at me in a funny way. And he was saying, we're kind of thinking of calling these defects treasures. And I said, oh, treasures. Okay, that's funny. I mean, is that kind of like the way we used to call bugs features? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah.
And he said, no, it's nothing like that. We actually call them treasures because these defects are giving us information against our system that we did not know about. And these defects are telling us, here's something that's wrong. And if you take those defects seriously and you fix them and you find the root cause of them, that system will now be much, much better than before. So that defect is a gift. It's a treasure. It helps us make a better system. And I think that was such a great way of looking at defects and looking at how he sort of embraced those defects, those errors, if you will, those mistakes. It was actually viewed as a positive thing that we could get those exposed, get them out there, deal with them so they don't have to happen again. And then as a result of that, we have a much better system rather than putting it under the carpet, pretending it's not there,
Yeah.
ultimately until it blows up.
I like that mindset, that inside every defect there's an improvement, which means eventually more value.
That's right. It's a treasure. And of course, it's only a treasure if you actually take that defect seriously and fix the
Correct.
root cause of it. Now, if you just look at the defect and say, oh, that's a defect, and then keep moving, that's a different story. But again, if you feel empowered to make those changes so that that defect doesn't occur again, then that's learning, which is, of course, what this is all about.
We're kind of coming to the end.
Yeah. I thought at the end of the day, this is probably what our conversation is about. We agree that change isn't optional. This is not something we can do because we may feel like it. I don't think we have a choice anymore. I think agility and agile, continuous improvement, these are things that is just part of business. I think if you think that that's something you can do as an optional thing, something you shouldn't take very seriously, then I question whether or not you're going to survive. I think it is was it Darwin who said something like survival. What did he say? He said survival isn't mandatory. It's like
Yeah.
it's up to you whether or not you want to
Yeah.
continue to improve. Because if you choose not to, the option is there for you.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
think
the choice will be made for you whether you make the choice or not.
that's right. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. So we talked about culture. I think you brought us some slides there earlier, and I think that's really important. At the end of the day, I think the creating that culture is something that leaders need to take. They take a responsibility in that sense, and I think the data is just one of those things, one of those inputs that can help us guide that transformation. I think it can accelerate things. You can be more intentional. I think that's what your point was about the shortcut. It can really it can accelerate those conversations more
Yes.
quickly than if you just
Absolutely.
kind of willy-nilly go in there. And
Yeah.
again, it's not about getting answers out of this. It's about those conversations. Got to make it safe so people can express their opinions. And then this quote here at the end is actually something I got from Mike Cohn. He says, "Agile is not something you become; it's something you become more of." And I think it's a beautiful way to say it. It's a continuous improvement process. It's not a destination, like you said earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you can't underline this enough, because people do feel like, oh, we can tick this box and suddenly we're now agile. It doesn't work like that. It's going to be something that, as a part of the exponential curve of technology, consumer taste changes, globalization, there's always going to be more to learn, more to grow.
Exactly. And then this is why we have been trying to avoid maturity models. I think very often people say, oh, can't you translate comparative agility into a maturity model? And then you can say, now we're awesome, now we're agile. And I really work against that, because it's not that simple. It's not like you can say, all right, you're now checking these boxes and you're agile and done. It's just not that way. You can always improve the way you work, and it's a continuous journey, and it's not as simple as just saying, here, you're excellent. And I also think when people use these different terms, sometimes they'll say, walk, crawl, run, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that could be a little bit insulting for companies who might be in a crawl state.
Yeah.
You know what? They may be as agile as they can be at that point, and that doesn't mean they're crawling. It means they're a successful company at their stage in their journey,
Yeah.
and where they go next is up to them. I don't think it's fair for us from outside to tell them that you're not agile. I mean, if they're more
Yeah.
agile today than they were yesterday, in my book, they're agile. They're on that journey then.
I've had this conversation many times, and in my courses, I've said the same, very similar thing. It's not, the question is not, are we agile? The question is, how agile can we be?
That's right. Exactly. Are you more agile today than you were yesterday? Back to that
Correct.
statement that Mike Cohn made. that is the essence of agility, and it's not about whether you're in a certain stage or not. And I think that's something that people have a hard time sometimes grasping, because they want these simple answers where you can just sort of say, okay, here's where we are. This is the magic, and we're done, or it's just not that simple.
So based on this talk, hopefully people are a little more agile tomorrow than they were today, by all the information that we've been giving them. And the next step that we'd really recommend is just to sign up for an account at Comparative Agility. Comparative Agility. It's hard to get in one mouthful, but there's a free account to start with. You can try out all of these surveys, see what works right for you, and start that journey.
Yeah, no, I would strongly encourage you to try it out, and it's one of those things, like you said, it's free, so you can try it for up to 5 collectors without costing you anything, and then you can see if you find value out of it. And I think
Absolutely.
we've been trying to make it very agile, in the sense that if companies want to try a pilot or something like that, it's completely free as well. And the thing that I have found is that there's not a single company who's actually done this who has said that it wasn't worth it. I don't know, $240 a year to do this, because if you make a single change, you already paid for the tool many times over, and that those insights that come from that data in itself is worth it. So yeah, I totally think it's worth it.
I believe it's the missing tool inside any agile team's framework. You've usually got your task management tool, whether it's Jira or Pivotal Track or whatever it is, but there's no tool the team really has for managing and improving team health and continuous improvement. I really feel this is the missing piece.
No, thank you. I think I'm glad you like it. I certainly have found it to be useful in my career. I was a client before I became part of this, so I'm a big fan.
Yeah, me too. And if people want to learn a bit more about the 5 pillars that we were talking about before, we only really lightly got into 2 of them, but I'd highly recommend you pick up Jorgen's book. It's the book I use. I've recommended to every single person that I've taught agility or agile transformation to, and it's pretty much available everywhere.
I think it is, and thank you for saying that. That means a lot, Simon. It took me 2.5 years to write that thing. What I can say, it's an honest and sometimes maybe too honest account of an insider's perspective. I really tried to not look at this as a consultant, because I wasn't a consultant when I wrote it. I was an insider, and I was sort of kind of tired of people coming from the outside telling me how easy this should be, and I wanted to sort of say, okay, for all those people that are in the middle of a transformation or about to start a transformation, I wanted to give them very practical ideas of how this actually works from the inside. So that's who this is for. Any change leader, whether it's an executive or a team member or a program manager or an agile coach, how this works from your perspective. And then taking a lot of examples from colleagues from other organizations too, and try to find some patterns that might be helpful.
I think it's important. The thing that I got out of it most was agile transformations, or whatever you're going to call it, can often take multi-years, multiple failures, multiple horizons, as people call them. Trying to jam those 5 years of learnings, let's say, into a couple hundred pages is extremely valuable, because you get that bird's eye view of what's going to happen, what to expect, all the different areas you're going to touch on. Yes, you'll be able to bite off one chunk at a time, but at least you have that understanding of the map of the region. You can decide where to go from there.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And I try to spend some time outlining a lot of the resources that I used, because there's only so much you can do in one book. But I wanted to say, okay, here's the key resources that I was consulting as I was going through this. And so I outlined them there as well. I mean, we all stand on the shoulders of giants here. And
Yes,
so I try to
absolutely.
really highlight that, because there's a lot of great literature out there, but buying all those books once, it can be very overwhelming. So I think it's good to kind of have something to start with, and then you can pick and choose which you want to dig deeper into.
Awesome. Well, it's been a fantastic time. Really appreciated you taking the time to talk with us, Jorgen. Just anyone out there who's listening right now, get in contact on LinkedIn if you have any further questions. We're happy to talk, ask questions, meet, whatever. But the most important thing here is to keep the conversation going. And thank you for your time, Jorgen.
Well, thank you, Simon. This was great. It was kind of felt like we were sitting in a bar having a beer, and which I love.
Yeah.
So this was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, fly to Oslo and we can do that for real.
Yeah, I love that idea very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.